A quiet hello to you. Night listener, tonight, we take a quiet stroll into the corridors of Japanese history, a place where even emperors sometimes mess things up. Picture this, you're at an extravagant poetry gathering in ancient Japan. Silk robes rustling softly around you. The faint scent of sandalwood incense drifting through the air. Everything feels perfectly serene. But here's the little catch: you might not survive the first round. Because remembering poetry lines in front of a hall full of nobles is actually terrifying. If you're ready to unwind, maybe press like or subscribe, only if it feels gentle and right for you. And did love to know, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, let the room grow quiet. Let your breath slow. Let the story begin. You shift slightly on your cushion, noticing that it's even firmer than you'd expected. The grand hall is packed with officials and nobles, each wearing a polite, carefully arranged expression, calm on the surface, but tense just underneath. This isn't your average tea gathering. This is Japan's highest level poetry assembly, attended by none other than the famously cultured Edo Emperor himself. He sits on a slightly raised dais in front of an elaborate gold mine, a sleeved folding screen. His expression calm and poised, but if you look closely, you'll notice the hand holding his fat rumbles ever so slightly turns out. Not even emperors are immune to nerves. In the Edo era, these poetry gatherings were anything but casual. Each guest was expected to recite or compose verses on the spot, following strict themes announced ahead of time. But the lines themselves, those you had to memorize perfectly. No cheat sheets, no hidden notes, just your memory, your composure, and the silent judgment of a hall full of the sharpest literary minds in the realm. If it were you sitting here tonight, you'd probably be mentally reciting your lines for the 100th time, praying you don't blank when your moment comes time. Because if you slip up, there's no shortage of people ready to gossip about it for weeks. So when it's the emperor's turn, you hold your breath, expecting flawless performance. He rises gracefully, adjusts his posture, and clears his throat. The room falls perfectly silent, every pair of eyes locked onto him, and then an awkward flicker of confusion crosses his face. You recognize that look instantly. It's the same face you make when you forget your ATNPIN. HES lost his lines, completely blank. The silence grows heavier. You feel nobles nearby shifting nervously, exchanging quick glances while trying to keep their faces composed. This is the emperor. After all, he can't make mistakes except right now. He just did. In the corner, you hear faint whispers among the court musicians. They know it's happening. They spring into action, fingers ready at koto, shamisen, and biwa strings, without missing a beat. They begin to play soft, flowing notes that wrap around the room like a summer breeze, trying to cover the uncomfortable hush with a gentle musical rescue. But this time, there are no lyrics, just pure melody. You're sitting there, caught in this bizarre moment, Japan's most important man standing perfectly still, the band playing along as if everything's fine, and an entire hall pretending this is exactly how it was meant to be. You start to wonder if this is some avant-garde performance. You never got the memo for some radical new art form, or just the world's most polite, beautifully staged accident. And the emperor, he recovers fast. He lifts his head, a faint, composed smile on his lips. He nods slowly to the music, acting as though HES simply savoring this lyric minus less version. The nobles, picking up the cue, follow suit, heads lower, eyes soften, everyone pretending to soak in the moment's elegance. And you? You do the same, pretending to drift away in the melody. Even though in your head you're laughing a little. Who knew an emperor forgetting his lines could turn into art? It's moments like this that make history so wonderfully human. Some scholars today still argue about the details. Did he truly forget the lines, or was it a planned moment of creative silence? No one knows for sure. But whether it was a slip or an act of quiet genius, you're here, Sitting cross-legged on the stiff cushion, watching a tiny accident transform into a story that people will whisper about for generations. Outside, the moonlight softens, incense drifts lazily in thin curls, and even the hard cushion beneath you doesn't feel quite so stiff anymore. And you realize sometimes it's the small imperfections that make history worth remembering. The music continues to weave through the hall, calm and sweet like a soft cloth draped over the tense silence from moments ago. The Emperor stays still, smiling faintly as if this was his plan all along. And you? You're secretly grateful you're not the one who just blanked out in front of the entire court. If you'd been the one to lose your lines tonight, you'd probably be halfway to jumping out a side window by now. But if you think about it, the real reason this moment even happened is buried inside the twisted rules of Edo poetry gatherings. These weren't your average garden parties. If you were invited here, you had to know every subtle rule, and the unspoken rules were even more terrifying than the official ones. First, the outfit. Everyone from young noble to seasoned court elder had to wear formal layers. Layers upon layers of heavy, crisp silk, each fold pressed, just so, each tie and sash precisely arranged. Even the angle your sleeve draped at your wrist could spark a side glance, or two if it was off. And then, there was the kneeling. You'd spend hours kneeling on tatami mats. What started as a polite pose quickly turned your knees to stone and your feet numb. You'd find yourself longing for your moment to stand, not for the honor of reciting your verse, but just to stretch your legs before they gave up entirely. Then came the heart of it, the poem. Every attendee needed to memorize a new piece, perfectly matched to the gathering's theme. You could practice for weeks, pacing your verse and by moonlight, reciting lines until you mumbled them in your sleep. But once you stepped onto that polished floor under the watchful eyes of your peers, your mind could betray you in a heartbeat, because these guests weren't just passive listeners. Many were sharp-tongued poets, critics, and officials. People who lived to catch a flaw, slip one word, stumble on one line. The feel eyes darting like hawks. The polite smiles never slipped, but you'd see the tiny flicker of amusement as your sign that your stumble would be the quiet talk of the next moon-viewing party. But the real nightmare was the poetry itself. It was the forced calm. You had to look serene even if your heartbeat was sprinting. Smile gracefully if someone else messed up, but pray you'd never be the next victim. You had to be a mask of effortless elegance over a trembling mind. It was a social dance so rigid it left no room for mercy. So tonight, when you see the Emperor freeze, there's a traitorous flicker of relief in your chest. Because if even he can forget well, maybe you can forgive yourself for sweating through your under-minus robe when your turn comes. Maybe it's okay to be human, even here. Where did this all come from? Scholars still puzzle over it. Some say these gatherings were once simple ways for bored nobles to show off their verses over sacred sweets. Over time, the gatherings turned into high-stakes tests of wit and memory, soft duels fought with gentle smiles and hidden jabs. Others think the layers of etiquette were Edo Japan's way of turning art into a kind of armor protection for a class that feared the chaos of anything unstructured. Historians argue both sides, and still, no one fully agrees. For you, sitting stiff-need and half-numb, none of that matters now. Because tonight, the Emperor's tiny blank moment is transforming the suffocating rules, because something new, a hush, that opens the door for an unexpected art from silent recitation, an accidental improvisation that will ripple far beyond this room. You glance out the sliding doors where the moon still glows, rub your knees discreetly to bring life back to them, and let your shoulders drop a little. The awkward tension softens. The music hums gently on. And maybe, just maybe, imperfection doesn't ruin a night like this. Maybe it makes it last. You let yourself lean back gently, easing into the softness of the cushion beneath you, now somehow feeling softer than it did moments ago. around you. A murmur of conversation resumes quietly, and the gentle ripple of the musicians' instruments continues to dance through the room, offering a comforting backdrop. You find yourself wondering, how exactly did these palace musicians manage to rescue the emperor from what could have easily been the greatest embarrassment of his reign? Well, it turns out, these musicians weren't ordinary performers. In fact, they had a special skill, one that, oddly enough, might have qualified as an early version of karaoke. Of course, they didn't know that then, and neither did you. You're simply sitting there, softly amused, as this unexpected innovation begins to unfold. It started as an emergency backup plan, really something the musicians devised out of sheer necessity. Poetry recitations, as you've already seen, were fraught with opportunities for embarrassing slip-ups. The palace musicians had witnessed countless gatherings like this one, watching nervous aristocrats stumble through verses and awkwardly pause when their memories betrayed them. And, after enduring years of such painfully uncomfortable moments, the musicians finally decided that enough was enough. Quietly, discreetly, without the emperor's knowledge or anyone else's, they created a secret collection of musical pieces without any lyrics, pure, gentle melodies that could quietly fill awkward silences without anyone noticing. At first, they jokingly called these pieces the rescue tunes, since their sole purpose was to rescue anyone who happened to forget their lines, including, as luck would have it, even the emperor himself. You chuckle inwardly, picturing the musicians huddled together late at night in the dim light of lanterns, meticulously rehearsing these gentle, wordless melodies. Imagine them nervously joking to each other, "Someday we'll save someone very important," never expecting it to actually happen. At least not to the emperor, of all people. And yet tonight, that's precisely what occurred. You glance discreetly toward the musicians now, noting how they're sitting perfectly straight, expressions serene and serious, their fingers gently moving across their instruments. But beneath their calm exteriors, you suspect they're internally celebrating. After all, it isn't every day their little secret invention saves the emperor himself. It's fascinating, you think, how necessity truly is the mother of invention, even inventions as strange and whimsical as karaoke's distant ancestor. Of course, back then, no one had any idea this simple act of kindness, this quiet rescue plan, would one day inspire the noisy karaoke bars you know today. But for now, it's simply a way to gracefully smooth over awkwardness, gently easing the emperor and everyone else back into comfort. Interestingly, this was the first time musicians had developed strategies to avoid embarrassment in Japan's history. There was actually an older tradition among musicians in the Heian period, hundreds of years before this Edo gathering, of creating subtle cues to help aristocrats remember their lines. Those earlier methods had been mostly limited to subtle hand gestures or slight variations in rhythm tricks known only to the musicians themselves. But creating a whole set of purely instrumental songs to serve as an official backup, that was genuinely innovative, and surprisingly bold. Historical experts today still debate exactly how common such practices were. Some argue that these instrumental rescue songs were relatively common, while others insist this was an exceptionally rare and perhaps even singular occurrence, highlighting how anxious these poetry gatherings truly were. Regardless of scholarly disagreements, you find yourself quietly impressed by these musicians. They not only protected the emperor's dignity but also subtly transformed the entire atmosphere of the gathering, turning a potentially humiliating scene into an elegant, tranquil moment of contemplation. Meanwhile, you notice that the guests around you seem to be slowly relaxing as well, their previously tense postures easing into more natural, comfortable positions. It's remarkable how quickly human beings can adapt to unexpected situations, especially when guided gently by music. Some of the aristocrats have begun nodding slightly, eyes closed, as if deeply moved by the melody. Others quietly mouth their own words, improvising poetic verses silently to themselves. Unknowingly, they're participating in what future generations might call a primitive form of karaoke minus the microphones. Of course. You smile softly, amused at the thought. After all, karaoke today is famously loud, often hilariously off-key, and typically accompanied by flashing neon lights and questionable song choices. But here, in this elegant hall illuminated softly by flickering lanterns, karaoke, or rather, its quiet ancestor, exists as a refined, delicate art form, born from compassion rather than a desire for spotlight. And so, as the gentle melodies continue to swirl around the room, you relax deeper into your cushion, grateful for this historical quirk, this little known secret tucked within Japan's past. You realize something important tonight. History is filled with tiny, forgotten moments just like this, moments that seem trivial but quietly shape culture in subtle yet lasting ways. Gently stretching your legs, you take a quiet breath, savoring the softness of the moment. Who would have thought the polished and refined world of imperial poetry gatherings could accidentally pave the way toward something as delightfully carefree and unpretentious as karaoke? Certainly not the musicians, certainly not the emperor, and definitely not you. Yet here you are, quietly witnessing the creation of history, one gentle melody at a time. The musicians, unaware of their impact, continue playing their wordless tunes, filling the night with gentle rhythms. The emperor, his dignity restored, gently taps his folding fan to the melody, nodding gracefully along. Perhaps history is most beautiful in these unexpected moments when mistakes turn into masterpieces, and awkward pauses become quiet invitations for creativity. And maybe tonight you think that's exactly what's happening. A forgotten line of poetry has blossomed into something new, something peaceful, something truly memorable. You close your eyes, allowing yourself to drift quietly on this river of gentle sound, the whispers of history lulling you softly toward rest. After all, there will always be plenty of time tomorrow to worry about poetry recitations. Tonight, it's enough just to sit, to breathe, and to smile gently at the thought of karaoke as humble beginnings. You gently shift your posture again, feeling how your body has become increasingly relaxed. Your mind drifts lazily through the scene around you, enjoying this unexpected calm created by the gentle, lyric minus less melodies. You glance over at the emperor, who still maintains that serene, thoughtful expression. If anyone has noticed his earlier mistake, they seem to have politely erased it from memory. This quiet generosity among the aristocracy impresses you, even as it amuses you. After all, what else could they do? Publicly correcting the emperor wouldn't exactly be a wise career move. As the minutes pass, something intriguing begins to happen. Rather than returning immediately to regular poetry recitations, the guests continue to quietly hum or mouth verses, inspired by the instrumental muse that's still softly resonating around them. No one dares to raise their voice fully, out of respect or perhaps just out of cautious confusion. You notice a fascinating shift. This accidental pause in poetry has become a new form of entertainment. A kind of improvised silent singing, subtly inspired by the emperor himself. From your seat, you watch the dignitaries and nobles begin to experiment cautiously. One elderly official, known for his serious demeanor, begins tapping his fan lightly against his palm, eyes closed as he silently recites verses he might never dare speak aloud. A younger court lady sitting nearby tilts her head gently, swaying slightly as she quietly matches her breathing to the melody, as if she's softly singing to herself. Suddenly, the room feels less like a tense, formal poetry gathering, and more like a tranquil, contemplative sanctuary. It seems, you realize, that the Emperor has unintentionally sparked a strange but delightful game of follow minus the minus leader. But instead of a childish game, it's a silent, elegant display of poetic grace and subtle improvisation. You almost envy how naturally the Emperor recovered from such an awkward moment, wondering briefly if you could ever handle embarrassment with such regal poise. History has always been filled with tales of powerful rulers who displayed strength or cunning. But what impresses you most tonight is something softer, subtle array ruler who can calmly turn an embarrassing moment into an occasion of quiet artistic reflection. Historians today still debate whether the Emperor was truly improvising or simply putting on a good show to save face. Does it really matter? Either way, tonight he's given his guests something much more valuable than poetry. He's given them permission to relax, to breathe, and even to make gentle mistakes. Speaking of gentle mistakes, you notice one aristocrat across the room. A young nobleman wearing a strikingly elaborate kimono, clearly mouthing entirely wrong words. His lips move slightly out of sync with the rhythm, betraying that he's either reciting a completely different poem or perhaps silently singing a tune entirely unrelated to tonight's theme. Yet nobody minds. Nobody corrects him. In fact, everyone around him politely pretends not to notice. You find yourself smiling warmly at this quiet solidarity, this collective agreement that tonight's true elegance lies in allowing imperfections to exist, unnoticed and unquestioned. As your eyes slowly wander around the beautifully decorated hall, you take another small, charming details. A servant quietly lights another incense stick, sending tendrils of sandalwood smoke curling delicately toward the ceiling. Across the room, an older aristocrat discreetly adjusts his seating position, clearly relieved by this unexpected musical interlude, a chance to rest his tired knees without losing face. Your mind drifts briefly into curiosity. Could this tranquil, wordless singing really be the humble beginnings of karaoke? Historians would later clarify that the true modern karaoke we know today emerged much later, fueled by technology and modern entertainment culture. Yet this serene-spirited evening feels unmistakably connected, a gentle ancestor to modern karaoke's joyful spontaneity. It's as if the seed of a distant tradition was quietly planted tonight, nurtured by a blend of forgetfulness, compassion, and music. At this thought, you can't help but gently laugh to yourself. It's funny, isn't it? Most inventions come from bold visionaries or brilliant minds. Yet karaoke, arguably one of Japan's most iconic cultural exports, had its quiet, accidental roots in a forgetful emperor and a compassionate group of palace musicians. You stretch slightly, feeling comfortable and grateful to witness such a wonderfully bizarre moment in history. If you were ever asked what the true spirit of karaoke is, you'd now confidently say it's the joy of being imperfect in public without fear or embarrassment. Perhaps that's why karaoke remains so universally loved today, from bustling Tokyo bars to cozy lounges halfway across the globe. Everyone secretly longs for permission to be gently imperfect, something this emperor unknowingly granted centuries ago. Looking again toward the musicians, you notice they've shifted to an even softer melody, clearly sensing the peaceful mood that now envelops the gathering. It seems they've understood that tonight's unexpected musical improvisation has gone beyond mere entertainment. It's become a quiet gift, inviting everyone present to shed their anxieties and expectations. Watching their careful movements, you imagine they must feel deeply satisfied, knowing their carefully prepared melodies serve an unexpectedly profound purpose. Historically, palace musicians weren't generally acknowledged as significant figures, their contributions mostly forgotten by history. Yet tonight, you're quietly grateful for them. You wonder if they ever imagined their simple acts of kindness and gentle improvisation would someday be remembered, even if quietly, even if only by those who truly appreciate such subtle, human moments. You slowly close your eyes again, breathing in the calm. If there's one lesson you'll carry away tonight, it's this: sometimes, life's most beautiful moments arise precisely from the imperfections the gentle missteps, the quiet mistakes we make along the way. And though the historians might still debate exactly what happened this evening, whether it was genius or mere luck, you prefer to think it was simply a moment of quiet humanity, illuminated softly by kindness. As you settle further into relaxation, your breathing slows to match the gentle rhythm of the musician's song. The lanterns flicker softly around you, casting gentle shadows across the delicate paper walls, creating an atmosphere of peacefulness. And you find yourself thinking perhaps history isn't only made by powerful figures or grand events. Perhaps it's also quietly made in moments like this one, a forgotten poem, a gentle melody, a room full of people silently discovering a new way to feel comfortable together. You're comfortably seated now, breathing slow, deep breaths, your mind drifting lightly in and out of gentle focus. The room around you has become a picture of peaceful harmony, each person lost in their own quiet world of silent poetry or imagined song. You catch glimpses of secret smiles, softly humming lips, and faces relaxed by the comfort of knowing nobody is being judged tonight. Somehow, the Emperor's graceful reaction to his forgetfulness has granted everyone permission to embrace imperfection openly and silently. But how exactly did this odd, quiet practice catch on, you wonder? How did something as peculiar as a poetry gathering filled with gentle humming and silent verses become a widespread phenomenon? Perhaps because it offered something genuinely unique, a chance for people to connect without pressure or embarrassment. Without the fear of forgetting lines, guests could finally relax. They were free to enjoy poetry and music simply for the pleasure of it, rather than as a social competition. Over the following days and weeks, word of the Emperor's graceful silent performance quietly spread throughout the palace. The aristocracy, always eager to mimic the Emperor's tastes and habits, quickly began to embrace this new, peaceful art form. What began as a moment of polite confusion soon blossomed into an elegant cultural fad known as silent singing. The first people to wholeheartedly adopt the strange practice were the younger nobles, eager for any fresh trend to distinguish themselves at social gatherings. Imagine the conversations whispered between silk-clad aristocrats as they strolled palace gardens. Have you tried it yet? Silent singing, they call it. Indeed, it's very fashionable. You don't have to worry about forgetting your verses anymore. And with gentle laughter, silent singing quickly became an aristocratic social necessity. Before long, palace officials found themselves having to organize special poetry evenings specifically for silent performances. There were detailed instructions on the invitations, no audible singing permitted. Guests carefully practiced the art of subtle facial expressions and gentle movements that implied deep artistic engagement, but never crossed into audible territory. The poetry gatherings of Edo, Japan were transformed almost overnight into quiet affairs of poetic contemplation, gentle pantomime. Interestingly, historical records indicate these silent poetry gatherings quickly became beloved precisely because of their quiet absurdity. Aristocrats found themselves charmed by the chance to relax in public without fear of judgment. Some historians suggest that this newfound freedom from social anxiety was exactly what had transpired so quickly, though this point is still gently debated among scholars today. But there was another, slightly stranger reason behind the phenomenon's popularity. Whispered rumors at the time suggested that these silent poetry evenings offered a delightful escape from the overly formal and rigid conventions of court life. Courtiers discovered something liberating about mouthing verses silently, free from scrutiny. They could express themselves with gestures and movements that felt playful and spontaneous, sometimes even humorous. You smile softly, picturing dignified officials silently miming dramatic verses with exaggerated hand movements, their eyes sparkling mischievously, knowing they could never have gotten away with such displays had actual voices been involved. The silent singing gatherings soon took on an almost comedic element, though always carefully controlled and never openly acknowledged. Humor, after all, was acceptable at court but only if disguised beneath layers of subtlety and grace. Of course, not everyone immediately understood the appeal. Older aristocrats and palace elders, bewildered by this new fashion, shook their heads quietly and muttered into their teacups about youthful frivolity. Some even complained of their teacups' avowity. Politely, of course, that silent singing lacked the traditional rigor and dignity of poetry recitations. But these murmurs of disapproval did little to dampen enthusiasm, if anything. They quietly confirmed to the younger nobles that they had discovered something genuinely fresh and appealing. Meanwhile, historians today continue to puzzle over precisely how widespread this phenomenon truly became. While some scholars argue that silent poetry gatherings remained largely a courtly curiosity, others insist that they quickly filtered down into broader society. There are even intriguing, though gently contested, accounts of provincial noble families adopting silent singing as a means of sophisticated entertainment, adding a hint of imperial elegance to otherwise dull rural evenings. Regardless of scholarly disagreements, one thing is clear: silent singing swiftly evolved into a cherished part of Edo-era aristocratic culture. Poets and musicians composed special pieces, specifically designed to be silently enjoyed, verses full of subtle humor, visual imagery, and gentle irony, perfect for wordless appreciation. The first minus ever book of silent songs, a slim volume titled Melodies for the Inner Voice, was published quietly, of course, and circulated secretly among the nobility, offering readers endless amusement through its gentle absurdity. As you imagine yourself gently leafing through such a book, you can't help but smile at the thought of a volume of poetry never meant to be read aloud. Pages filled with verses whose sole purpose was silent appreciation, words that would never disturb the peace of a room. It's both amusing and strangely touching, a testament to humanity's endless creativity in pursuit of gentle pleasure. Slowly, silently, these poetic evenings became cherished, not just for entertainment, but as a quiet form of emotional release. Courtiers discovered they could express feelings silently that might otherwise be too risky to voice openly: frustrations, longings, gentle disappointments, without ever uttering a single audible word. It was a gentle, socially acceptable rebellion against the stifling formalities of palace life, a secret shared collectively yet silently. Perhaps that explains why the trend lasted so long, quietly influencing Japanese artistic culture in subtle ways for generations afterward. Even when the practice itself eventually faded into history, its spirit lingered quietly in cultural memory, occasionally resurfacing in unexpected forms. With its blend of public performance and personal vulnerability, may well be one of those forms, though historians still gently debate the connection. For tonight, though, such academic disagreements matter little. As you relax further, breathing slower, your body feels heavy and warm, gently supported by the soft cushions beneath you. The soothing melodies still drift quietly through the room, blending seamlessly with your quiet breathing, creating an atmosphere of peaceful contemplation. As your eyelids grow heavier, you realize something profoundly comforting: history isn't just about grand events or powerful leaders. Sometimes it's made quietly, gently, by ordinary people finding small, secret ways to feel freer, lighter, more connected. Perhaps this silent poetry, this gentle ancestor of karaoke, is one such quietly revolutionary moment. You smile softly, letting your breathing slow to match the gentle music. History's quietest moments often speak the loudest truths. You think truths about kindness, creativity, and the gentle courage it takes to be imperfect. And so you drift softly into calmness, savoring this gentle historical moment, allowing yourself to rest deeply, knowing there's no need for words right now. As you sit quietly, your eyes half closed, enjoying this gentle journey through history, you find your thoughts drifting into the delicate intricacies of Edo-era social etiquette. It's astonishing, you think, how quickly and smoothly silent singing found its place among Japan's aristocracy, becoming something akin to a secret social code. Understood yet unspoken, practiced yet never loudly advertised. After all, if there's one thing aristocratic Japanese culture prized above almost everything else, it was subtlety. You smiled gently at the irony, a culture famous for subtle communication finding itself enchanted by an even subtler from silent poetry recitations. Music without audible singing, gatherings characterized not by what was spoken, but by what was left quietly unsaid. In the days following the emperor's poetic mishap, something curious happened. Word of this new social practice, the elegant art of silent singing, spread swiftly through Edo's highest circles. But it didn't spread openly, rather, it crept quietly through whispered conversations, gently raised eyebrows, and knowing smiles exchanged in palace hallways, unshaded gardens. Aristocrats soon realized that mastering this quiet pastime was essential if one wanted to be seen as sophisticated and cultured. You imagine yourself attending one of these events. Picture gently stepping into a softly lit room filled with refined guests dressed in meticulously layered silk kimonos, the fainter aroma of incense floating gently through the air. You're offered a seat, carefully positioned to showcase your etiquette and your status. You politely bow, aware that every movement, every subtle gesture is being quietly observed, undevaluated. At first, you're anxious, worried you might miss some critical unspoken rule. You glance discreetly around, watching as more experienced guests seamlessly mimic the emperor's wreathed examples, sitting perfectly poised, softly humming or silently mouthing poetic verses. The musicians continue their gentle playing, carefully guiding the rhythm of these wordless performances. And gradually, you begin to understand the subtle rules that govern this odd, delicate game. First, no matter how deeply moved you feel, you must never produce actual sound beyond the faintest whisper or gentle hum. Anything louder would ruin the tranquility of the gathering and label you as unsophisticated. Second, your facial expressions must convey quiet enjoyment, never exaggerated but always subtly appreciative. Finally, the way you move your fan or tilt your head speaks volumes about your emotional response to the poem you silently recite. A slight nod of approval, a gentle sway indicating delight, or an almost imperceptible smile reflecting quiet amusement. Each small gesture becomes a part of your silent poetic performance, carefully crafted to impress your peers without attracting undue attention. These subtle gestures quickly became a vital form of aristocratic communication, a gentle social code that only insiders truly understood. Palace etiquette manuals were quietly updated to include delicate instructions on how to perfect one's silent singing technique, though historians today gently debate exactly how widespread these instructional guides became. Some argue they were strictly limited to court circles, while others suggest the trend quietly spread much further into society than traditional histories acknowledge. Regardless of how widely practiced, silent singing had undoubtedly become an essential skill for social advancement. A young noble hoping to rise through palace ranks now faced the unexpected task of mastering this bizarrely specific art form. Indeed, many aristocratic tutors privately advised their charges to spend hours silently reciting poetry in front of mirrors, refining each subtle facial expression and delicate gesture until perfected. It was said that the most skillful practitioners could silently recite entire epics without ever betraying their emotions beyond a faint, appreciative nod. And so, what began as an emperor's forgetfuls evolved quietly into a strange and charming social custom. You can't help but smile softly at the thought, but smile softly. An entire social class secretly competing in silence, each participant gently striving to appear more elegantly indifferent and subtly expressive than the next. It's almost humorous how seriously everyone took something that started as a simple attempt to cover up embarrassment. Yet perhaps this seriousness is precisely why silent singing became so beloved. It allowed aristocrats a quiet escape from relentless social pressures, a moment of gentle rebellion disguised as refined compliance. To an outsider, these silent performances might seem absurd or pointless. But to those who lived under the constant scrutiny of Edo-era etiquette, silent singing offered a rare opportunity to express themselves gently, creatively, and privately, hidden in plain sight. Historians today continue to debate whether silent singing truly represented a rebellion against strict social norms or merely reinforced them in a subtler form. Some argue it provided much-needed relief from an oppressive etiquette culture, while others contend it simply added another complex layer to the already dense social code. But tonight, you quietly conclude, perhaps the answer doesn't matter. What's truly fascinating is how human beings, in any era, always find ways, no matter how small or so, to carve out moments of gentle freedom and quiet creativity. Even now, centuries later, you're softly amused by the lengths people went to practice this delicate art. You picture yourself meticulously rehearsing your silent poetry, carefully mastering every gentle gesture, every subtly expressive glance. You wonder briefly whether you would have been good at it. Could you have hidden your anxiety behind a serene, elegant expression? Could you have conveyed gentle enjoyment without ever raising your voice? You chuckle inwardly, suspecting you probably would have found some way to mess it up. But tonight, in this gentle, imagined moment, you simply smile quietly to yourself, content to know you never actually have to perform. Instead, you enjoy the peaceful absurdity of it, all the quiet poetry of human imperfection, the gentle humor of aristocrats competing silently, and the elegant creativity sparked by something as simple as forgetting a few words. Gradually, your thoughts slow. Your breathing deepens. You're grateful for this gentle journey into history, grateful for the quiet lessons tucked within it. Lessons about subtlety, kindness, and the gentle courage to find quiet joy, even in the most absurd circumstances. You close your eyes again, letting these gentle reflections carry you softly into peaceful relaxation. Because in the end, perhaps this is exactly what history is meant for, not just learning dates and names, but gently discovering timeless truths about ourselves. Quiet truths hidden in gentle stories, truths about human kindness, creativity, and the simple joys found within our imperfections. And tonight you think history feels especially gentle. So, you breathe slowly, deeply, allowing yourself to rest comfortably within it, softly smiling at the gentle humor of it all. As you rest comfortably, breathing slow and steady, you find yourself gently drifting deeper into the quiet charm of this historical evening. The soft melodies from the musicians have become like gentle ripples on a pond, lulling your mind into a peaceful reflection. In this state of calm, your thoughts turn quietly toward one of history's least minus known treasures, something almost entirely forgotten by modern historians. The Emperor's official collection of lyric minus less musical scores. Yes, believe it or not, following that awkward yet transformative poetry gathering, the palace musicians secretly began compiling their gentle instrumental pieces into an official anthology, quietly titled Whispers of Silence. This small, beautifully bound book soon became a prized possession within the imperial palace. It was quietly passed among trusted courtiers and discreetly treasured by those lucky enough to have access to its pages. You smile softly, imagining yourself gently turning the delicate pages of this mysterious collection. Each carefully inked sheet holds no lyrics, only beautifully drawn musical notation and elegant calligraphy indicating mood and rhythm. Soft brush strokes suggest peaceful contemplation, serene enjoyment, or gentle melancholy. Instructions are subtle to be enjoyed quietly. One page might advise perfect for silent appreciation, another gently encourages. This quiet anthology was unlike anything else produced at the time, a subtle yet deeply influential creation that historians often overlook. After all, in traditional historical accounts, events and artifacts tend to be remembered for their boldness, drama, or explicit importance. A tiny book of gentle, lyric minus less melodies hardly seems significant compared to grand battles, famous rulers, or momentous social upheavals. And yet, it represented something quietly revolutionary, an official recognition of silence as a meaningful artistic experience. Of course, even at the time, few openly acknowledged the existence of this unique collection. The palace musicians, cautious about offending traditional expectations, shared their creation only among trusted confidants. Occasionally, quiet gatherings would be held, during which guests sat in gentle contemplation, silently reading these musical notations as though they were poetry. Historical accounts describe these events in whispered tones, noting the quiet wonder and subtle delight guests felt as they softly read music rather than listen to it. Historians still gently debate whether these unusual gatherings really happened as described, or if later accounts romanticized their quiet charm. Nevertheless, it's intriguing to consider that such subtle gatherings might have occurred. Imagine entering a softly lit room, comfortably furnished with silk cushions on small lacquer tables, each holding a copy of the treasured anthology. Guests would quietly seat themselves, gently turning the pages, silently savoring each composition. No music would be played aloud. Instead, attendees would imagine the melodies in their minds, guided gently by the calligraphy and rhythmic notation. It would have been a profoundly peaceful experience, something so refined and delicate that modern historians often find it difficult to classify. You chuckle gently to yourself, quietly amused by the thought perhaps this little minus-known historical oddity was the Edo equivalent of today's mindful sins apps or meditation playlists. Quietly soothing, deeply personal, and subtly revolutionary in its simplicity. Today, historians gently debate this comparison. Some argue it's anachronistic, while others find it charmingly accurate. But tonight, as you rest comfortably and imagine these gentle gatherings, you find yourself leaning toward the latter view. Interestingly, historians who study Edo-era music have quietly noted that similar lyric such compositions occasionally appeared elsewhere during this period, often in private collections belonging to noble families. Yet the emperor's anthology seems to have been uniquely influential, quietly inspiring a wave of gentle creativity among court musicians and aristocratic poets. Silently, subtly, a new appreciation for lyric-free melodies and peaceful contemplation emerged, offering a quiet alternative to the era's oft unrigidly structured poetic conventions. But perhaps the most delightful aspect of Whispers of Silence was its gentle, slightly humorous dedication. Quietly inscribed at the front of the book was a carefully worded acknowledgement in honor of moments when memory gently fails, silence sweetly prevails. It was a subtle, playful tribute to the emperor's famous forgetfunsels, quietly referencing the poetic mishap that inspired the anthology's creation. You smile gently at this quiet nod to imperfection, imagining the musicians cautiously wording their dedication, careful not to offend imperial dignity yet unable to resist the gentle humor inherent in their situation. And somehow, you suspect the emperor himself might have quietly appreciated this gentle joke, perhaps even smiling softly when he first saw the anthology. While the emperor's actual response remains quietly debated among historians, the anthology itself became quietly treasured. In fact, historical records suggest it inspired an entire genre of gentle, instrumental music that persisted for generations. Some scholars even argue that the anthology indirectly influenced later Japanese musical traditions, though again, this idea remains gently contested. What's certain, though, is that this quiet collection embodied a beautiful truth about human creativity. Often, our most meaningful innovations emerge quietly, gently from moments we might otherwise consider mistakes or embarrassments. And perhaps that's precisely why this small, forgotten book feels so deeply comforting tonight. It's a gentle reminder that our own imperfections, our quiet slips and gentle forgetfunsels, can sometimes lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Your breathing slows further, matching the gentle rhythm suggested by the imagined pages of Whispers of Silence. Each breath feels softer, calmer, as if you're quietly reading this lyric minus less music yourself, letting its gentle melody soothe your mind. And as you drift deeper into relaxation, you softly acknowledge a quiet sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the emperor's gentle forgetfulness, for the musician's quiet ingenuity, and for history's charming habit of quietly preserving these subtle, forgotten treasures. Tonight, you realize gently, history isn't just made in loud declarations or grand actions. Often, it's quietly woven from these tiny moments, gentle acts of kindness, and subtle creative expressions. Moments that remind us, gently yet profoundly, of our shared humanity, our quiet strengths, gentle humor, and capacity for subtle beauty. You gently close your eyes, comfortably sinking deeper into relaxation, letting the quiet echoes of this gentle history carry you softly toward sleep. In the quiet sanctuary of your mind, you softly imagine turning each delicate page of that forgotten anthology, gently savoring every silent melody, every quiet note. And slowly, peacefully, you drift toward dreams, comforted by the gentle truth at the heart of tonight's story, that sometimes silence is the sweetest music of all. Your breath is slow now, your shoulders gently resting, your mind wrapped in the soft warmth of this quietly absurd but strangely comforting tale. The soft flicker of lantern light dances behind your closed eyelids, and somewhere in the distance, you imagine the gentle pluck of a shamisen string, the hush of silk sleeves brushing together. Tonight, your journey drifts beyond the palace walls. You find yourself slipping through the elegant gates, past the manicured gardens, into the bustling streets of Edo, where the emperor's quiet accident has begun to echo far beyond the marble floors and silk cushions of the imperial court. It starts innocently enough. A young court musician, newly apprenticed, finds himself carrying a copy of the emperor's beloved Whispers of Silence anthology home for secret practice. Hes careful. Of course, this is an imperial treasure, after all. But curiosity is difficult to hide. And so, late at night, when the city is hushed and the paper walls do little to muffle secrets, his family listens as he quietly strums the melodies, humming the silent verses that no one is technically supposed to hear. Outside, a neighbor pauses at the window. Then another neighbor leans in, curious. Wordless music drifts through wooden alleys, curling around lantern poles and over quiet courtyards. By dawn, whispers of the emperor's silent singing have left the palace for good, carried on lips that never say the secret too loudly but share it just enough to make it irresistible. Soon, in the back alleys and tea houses of Edo, a new game blossoms among common folk, a curious ritual they nickname the Emperor's Game. In tiny gatherings, friends sit cross-legged on tatami mats, a single shamisen player plucking out soft notes. But instead of singing along loudly, the guests mouth words silently, each person trying to match the tune without actually making a sound. If someone laughs or slips up with an audible hum, the whole group bursts into muffled giggles, scolding them in playful whispers. It's absurd, really, and yet, it's oddly comforting. In a world where your status, your clothes, your family name all weigh heavily on your shoulders, the Emperor's Game gives people a pocket of freedom to be gently foolish together. In this secret moment, there's no fear of shame, no worry about singing out of tune. Just silent verses, giggling mistakes, and the warm glow of lanterns cutting through the midnight dark. You can't help but smile at the image. Imagine a fisherman and his friends, shoulders sore from hauling nets all day, gathering around a single pot of steaming tea. One old man starts the melody on a battered shamisen, the rest mouth ancient poems they barely remember, pretending to be palace nobles, even though the only silk in the room is the old cloth covering the teapot. They hum too loudly sometimes. They forget lines. But nobody cares because in that tiny room, they are part of something bigger than themselves, part of an invisible thread that connects them, gently, to the hush of the Emperor's Golden Hall. Historians still argue, of course. Some claim the Emperor's game was just a colorful folk myth, dreamed up in old Edo taverns to amuse wandering storytellers. Others insist there are genuine records, old diaries, half-minus burned letters suggesting that silent singing did slip beyond the palace walls and find a second, humbler life in the city's backstreets. As always, is soft-minus edged, just like the stories themselves. Still, it makes sense, doesn't it? After all, every tradition needs ordinary people to carry it forward, to give it shape and laughter and warmth. Without them, even the Emperor's accidental genius would have stayed locked away behind screens and brocade curtains, gathering dust while the world outside danced to its own noisy, imperfect tune. You shift gently, imagining yourself sitting on that tatami floor, your knees tucked under you, a cup of lukewarm tea warming your fingers as you watch your friends mouth silly verses under the faint glow of paper lanterns. Outside, a night breeze rattles the bamboo, but inside, it's safe, warm, and softly absurd, like laughter you're not allowed to hear. In this small, wordless ritual, there is something beautifully human, a reminder that imperfection doesn't always need to be hidden. That laughter can be gentle, that silence can be playful. You realize, as your breathing slows again, that maybe this was always the secret at the heart of karaoke, not just the joy of singing loudly, but the deeper comfort of sharing your voice, or your silence, with people who don't mind if you get it wrong. Your thoughts drift further now, soft and featherlight. You think about how this humble, whispered tradition might have danced through the generations, sometimes fading, sometimes resurfacing. How it might have skipped quietly from tea house to tea house, from one sleepy fishing village to the next, always carried by people who needed just a little excuse to gather, smile, and gently forget the world outside for a while. And so you breathe out slowly, the weight of the day slipping away with the hush of your imagined shames and strings. Maybe, you think, the Emperor never knew how far his silent mishap would travel. Maybe the court never guessed how quickly the palace's gentle rescue melody would find a second life in the laughter and soft humming of ordinary people. But tonight, and that quiet truth, like the hush of your own breath, feels sweeter than any song. Your eyes stay closed now, your breathing calm, as the imagined scene shifts again, drifting gently from the flickering backstreets of Edo to a place you didn't expect. A small, unremarkable tea house perched beside a winding river on the city's quieter edge. The sign hanging above the door is simple, the paper lanterns outside faded by sun and rain. But inside, this little tea house holds a gentle secret that might quietly shape the next step in this odd journey from imperial mistake to cultural treasure. You slip inside, pushing aside a curtain so thin it barely counts as a door. The warm scent of roasted tea leaves drifts up to meet you, and you find yourself a spot at a low wooden table. A handful of locals sits scattered about, all pretending not to notice one another, which is the polite thing to do in Edo, of course. But the real reason there isn't the tea, though it's good enough. It's the hush of soft music drifting from the back room, where a young shamisen player sits alone under a single oil lamp, plucking out slow, wandering melodies that echo the palace's silent singing tradition, but with a gentle twist. Here in this, what the regulars affectionately call the accompaniment tea house, you don't need to know a single line of poetry to join in. There's no test of memory, no aristocratic rules about posture or subtlety. The only requirement is that you use it, sip your tea, and if the mood strikes you, you mouth along. A poem, a song, a half-remembered folk story your grandmother once whispered to you when you were 5. Nobody cares if your lips sync up perfectly. Nobody cares if you hunt aloud by accident. Though everyone does share a soft chuckle when it happens. This tea house, so tiny it barely fits a dozen people, becomes something quietly extraordinary. A place where common people gently reshape the emperor's accidental art form into something they can claim as their own. No brocade screens, no anxious poets desperate to impress. Just neighbors, strangers, travelers passing through gathered together by a simple promise you don't have to speak perfectly here. You just have to sit and let the music do its quiet work. Of course, word of this curious tea house trickles through Ito's rumor mill as fast as sake after curfew. Some say it's scandalous, peasants playing at being nobles. Others whisper it's harmless fun after all. Who's getting hurt if a few farmers want to pretend they're palace poets for an evening? A few purists grumble that the tea house is disrespectful to the emperor's refined tradition, but their complaints drift away like steam off a fresh cup of sencha. Because deep down, everyone knows the truth. People need places like this. Places where rules loosen, where laughter seeps through thin walls, where even silence feels communal. You shift gently in your seat, imagining yourself here among them. Maybe you're a fisherman, sleeves still damp from the river, watching steam curl up from your teacup. Maybe you're a young apprentice sneaking away after your master falls asleep, hoping to see if you really can mouth along to a song without messing up. Sitting here in this tiny room hundreds of years ago, listening to music that drifts through your thoughts like a soft breeze. History books rarely mention this tea house, why would they? Grand histories prefer empires, battles, treaties signed with ink and blood. But the quiet places, the hidden places where ordinary people gather to shape the small details that last. Those live on in half-minus forgotten gossip, dusty ledgers, and sometimes, if you're lucky, a single line scribbled in the corner of a faded journal stopped at Riverside. Warm tea, quiet songs. Nobody spoke. Lovely. Some historians still argue whether the accompaniment tea house was the first of its kind. Others say dozens of similar places appeared almost overnight, especially as Ito's merchant class grew richer and hungrier for little amusements once reserved for nobles. There are hence tiny records of these hush spots tucked behind safe stalls, inside bathhouses, even upstairs in bookshops, where people gathered to mouth along to a single shamisen or koto player, then slip back into the street, smiling at the gentle absurdity of it all. One thing they agree on: without these hidden corners of warmth and tea and gentle silence, the spirit of silent singing would have quietly faded away, locked forever behind palace walls. It was the ordinary people, craftsmen, porters, rice sellers who kept it alive, passing the melody from lips to lips, hush to hush, until one day someone got the idea that maybe, just maybe, the silence didn't have to be so strict. Maybe you could whisper just a little louder. Maybe you could sing out right softly at first, then boldly, surrounded by laughter instead of rules. But that's a gentle leap further down this story's winding path. For now, you simply rest here. You breathe in the warmth of the tea, feel the hush of the shamisen drift over you like a soft blanket. You watch your imagined self mouth words you barely remember. Old poems, nonsense rhymes, even the lines you make up on the spot. Nobody cares. Everyone's just here, quietly together, linked by a thread spun from an emperor's forgotten words into palace musicians' secret notes. And as you sit, you realize this is history too. Not the loud parts, the quiet parts. The parts that breathe in tiny tea houses, drifting across a river, waiting for the world to catch up. You smile at that thought, letting your shoulders sink further. Your breath steady and slow, as you let yourself drift deeper into this hush. Because here in this riverside room, you're not just an observer anymore. You're part of the hush. part of the gentle song that no one dares sing too loud yet. You stay right there, wrapped in the hush of that riverside tea house, your tea warm between your palms, your breath as steady as the quiet strum of the shamisen. The faint clink of ceramic cups and the gentle slide of a door panel remind you that this place lies on the edge between ordinary and secrete, it unripple in the river of Edo life. But beyond these sliding doors, the Emperor's game and the soft rebellion of the accompaniment tea house are not as invisible as they seem. Because no matter how discreetly people sip their tea and mouth their verses, word always finds its way to those who keep watch over customs and conduct, the officials of the shogunate and the stiff monocollared guardians of courtly order. After all, Edo is a city built on layers of carefully maintained appearance. A place where who you are and where you belong is written as clearly on your kimono sleeve as any family crest. And yet, behind these paper walls, fishmongers and apprentices are play acting as nobles, borrowing the emperor's accidental invention for laughter and warmth. To some, that feels harmless. To others, dangerously out of place, so word reaches the higher halls. First as hushed rumors, then as light concerns whispered by elderly ministers who believe silence should remain inside palace walls. Then, inevitably, as official questions what exactly is happening in these riverside tea houses, who is allowing these commoners to mouth noble poems and hum imperial melodies. No one's entirely sure what to do about it at first. There's no law against mouthing words, no rule that says silence belongs to the emperor alone. But the guardians of order understand something important: small amusements have a way of becoming larger freedoms if left unchecked. A little tea house where people pretend to be poets might grow into taverns where people pretend to be nobles. And from there, well, who knows? So quiet decrees are drafted. Notices are tacked up on market walls written in polite but unmistakable brusquecos. The gathering of persons for unauthorized musical entertainment without proper license is discouraged. It's not exactly a ban, more like a gentle warning. Ito's way of saying, "We see you. We'd rather you stopped. But we won't drag you away tonight. Just behave." Of course, you know how people are. A polite warning pinned to a tea house door only makes the warm hush inside feel more deliciously secret. So, for a time, the accompaniment tea houses flourish even more. The hush grows thicker, the laughter quieter but deeper. Now each mouthed word carries a tiny thrill, part poetry, part rebellion, all comfort. If anyone asks, the owner shrug. We serve tea. We enjoy music. No law against silence, is there? You sip your imaginary tea, amused at how gently defiant these common folk are. It's not the stuff of revolutions, no torches, no uprisings, no banners, just small acts of soft mischief, a whispered rhyme, a hummed note that drifts just a touch too loud before dissolving back into quiet. Meanwhile, back at court, the guardians of decorum scratch their heads. Clamping down too harshly would make them look humorless and heavy-handed, an embarrassment in itself. And so, like so many gentle rebellions throughout history, the hush survives in the cracks and corners where polite authority can't quite squeeze it out. It becomes a wink, a secret handshake, an open secret everyone knows, but nobody says too loudly. And historians? They still argue, of course. Some claim these gentle warnings and polite decrees were just empty gestures to appease palace conservatives. Others believe they mark the first spark of friction between Japan's tightly ordered class system and the common people's quiet longing for a little freedom. It's hard to say for certain. Records are scarce. Stories are slippery. But there's enough evidence and faded notices and diary scribbles to suggest the hush was never truly silenced. What you do know tonight, sitting here in this imagined hush, is how beautifully human this is. The way people find tiny, almost invisible ways to breathe around the edges of rules. The way silence itself becomes a gentle protest when spoken in unison by people who refuse to be entirely proper all the time. You can almost see it. A row of shogunate officials standing in a polished chamber, fussing over a scroll of minor ordinances. Meanwhile, down by the river, the tea houses glow warm in the dusk, steam curling out into the night as neighbors lean close, mouthing poems, stifling giggles, ungently ignoring every decree ever pinned to a door. And somewhere, back in the palace, the emperor who forgot his lines once upon a time sleeps peacefully, probably never knowing that his single moment of human imperfection has rippled all the way out here into the city's quiet rebellion of hushes and half-minus hidden psalms. Your eyes soften at that thought. Maybe. You wonder, if he did know, he would have smiled. Maybe he would have pressed a finger to his lips in playful approval, as if to say, yes, keep it quiet, but keep it alive. So you rest your teacup down gently on the wooden table, letting the hush of the tea house settle into your bones. Outside, the river flows on. The city hums with stories that slipped through gaps the officials can't patch. And here, inside this warm, flickering room, you realize once more how often unstoppable people's need for connection can be, even if all it takes is a silent psalm, mouthed in the corner of a sleepy tea house by people who just want, for a moment, to feel a little bigger than their ordinary lives. And so you breathe out softly, your shoulders warm, your mind drifting deeper into the hush. Because tonight, you're not just listening to history, you're quietly part of it. Your breath is so slow now, it's almost part of the hush itself, blending with the gentle clink of teacups and the muffled pluck of a shamisen somewhere in the corner. The little riverside tea house fades behind your eyelids, replaced by a softer vision, a wide stretch of countryside, far from Ito's bustling streets, where the hush has found a new home among fields, lanterns, and open sky. You find yourself in a small village tucked between green rice paddies and distant misty hills. There's no grand palace here, no lacquered screens or silk cushions. Just wooden houses with thatched roofs, chickens scratching in the yard, and neighbors who've known each other so long they can read each other's moods without words. Here, the emperor's accidental gift takes on a new shape altogether, one that only the countryside could invent. It starts, as these things so often do, at a festival night. Picture it a warm summer evening, the villagers gathered in a wide clearing under paper lanterns that bob and flicker like tiny moons. There's music, of course, someone's uncle plucking a shamisen, a few kids tapping along on old sake barrels turned into makeshift drums. At first, the singing is loud and joyful, voices rising into the warm night air. But as the sake flows, and laughter grows soft and drowsy, someone remembers the stories of the city, the hush, the emperor's game, the silent tea houses by the river, and someone, half-minus serious and half-minus tipsy, suggests a game. What if we sing without singing? At first, everyone laughs. What a silly idea. But the drums quiet down, the shamisen slows to a gentle strum, and one by one, the villagers gather in a loose circle under the lanterns. They mouth the words to an old harvest song, lips moving in the flicker of lantern light, but not a single voice rises above the hush. The only sounds are the night insects and the occasional giggle when someone messes up the words. Before they know it, the whole clearing is filled with a kind of invisible music, no melody you can hear, yet somehow everyone feels it. A silent harmony, half prayer, half gentle joke that wraps around them like the warm night air. In time, this strange new ritual finds a home in village life. After the festival, the elders quietly approve. It's harmless fun, they say. Good for keeping the young ones entertained without too much rowdiness. And so it settles into the rhythm of the countryside. A silent singing night, held every so often when the moon is round and the rice fields need a blessing. It's not fancy, no special clothes, no strict posture, no nervous aristocrats worried about subtle gestures. Just neighbors, friends, and family gathered together to mouth old songs they all know by heart. Some villages add little twists, friendly competitions for who can keep a straight face the longest, or whose silent verses are the most dramatic. Children dare each other to mouth the funniest lines without laughing out loud. The old folks ate nearby, chuckling at the sight, pretending they're too dignified to join the joint. Though when no one's watching, they mouth along too, savoring the gentle rebellion. It's funny. You think how something that started as a palace accident could transform so far from the palace's polished floors. But maybe it makes sense. Out here, silence isn't about etiquette or social rank, it's a game. A ritual, a gentle spell that ties people together without saying too much. And maybe, in a world where the seasons rule your life and the harvest decides your fortune, there's comfort in a quiet moment where every honest voice rests, but the feeling of togetherness hums on. Some wandering monks who pass through the village take note of this peculiar custom. In their travel diaries, long scrolls scribbled with more curiosity than judgment, they record these silent harvest songs. Some monks praise it as a meditation on impermanence. Sound without sound. A song without a voice, a reminder that all things pass gently if you let them. Others think it's just harmless village mischief and move on. Even today, historians argue which is closer to the truth, spiritual practice or countryside entertainment. As always, the answer is probably somewhere in the hush between the two. You shift slightly, imagining yourself among those villagers under the paper lanterns. Maybe you're a child, barely tall enough to see the circle's center, mouth opening and closing in exaggerated silence, fighting not to giggle when your friend pulls a silly face across from you. Or maybe you're older, standing near the back, savoring the soft absurdity of it all, knowing you're a part of something tiny and perfect that no shogun's decree could ever touch. Over time, these hush-minus-filled nights do more than pass. The hours, they gently remind the villagers that they belong to each other. When you mouth a line someone else knows too, you're reminded that the harvest, the cold winter, the spring thaw, none of it is faced alone. There's warmth in the hush. They comfort in pretending to sing what everyone already knows by heart. So, tonight, under the flicker of your own imagined paper lantern, you breathe out slowly and picture the soft smiles, the quiet shoulders bumping together, the invisible song drifting over dark fields. If you listen close enough, you can almost hear a hush so warm it feels like music. And you think, maybe that's the real legacy of the emperor's accidental silence, not just a tradition in gilded halls or hidden tea houses, but a hush that slips through paddy fields and fireflies, weaving neighbors together without ever needing a single word. You rest deeper into the hush now, your breath carrying you gently away from the countryside's flickering lanterns and back onto Japan's winding roads that coil through forests, cut across rice paddies, and eventually find their way back to the edge of the known world, the port cities where foreigners land, curious and wide-minded, no books stuck under their arms. Imagine it's the mid-1800 seconds now. Japan's law-held doors are creaking open. The once-isolated islands are cautiously peeking at the world beyond, and in slip the foreign missionaries. The traders, the wanderers, men with heavy coats and battered journals who scribble every unfamiliar detail as if the ink might keep it real forever. Among them is a missionary you can picture, clearly, spectacles perched on his nose, wide-brinded shading his sunburned face, his coat pockets stuffed with half-crumpled letters home. HES here to write about temples and customs, about taxes and politics, things the people back home care about, the important stories. But instead, he finds himself scratching his head late at night in an unfamiliar inn, listening through a thin wooden wall to something he doesn't quite understand. At first, he thinks it's ordinary singing. He leans closer, quill hovering over his journal. The more puzzled he becomes because there's music. Yes, the faint twang of a shinsen, a koto plucked with practiced fingers. But the voices he expects never arrive. He strains harder. Nothing. Just the shape of words that never cross the threshold of sound. He asks his hosts the next morning, trying not to seem impolite. Why do they not sing? The old innkeeper just shrugs, bemused, and explains as best he can in broken Dutch or English or half-minus remembered Portuguese. It is the hush. The emperor's hush. We sometimes sing without singing. He says it like it makes perfect sense. Which of course, to him, it does. The missionary scratches more lines into his journal by lantern light. He writes about the hush in careful, puzzled lines a peculiar local custom villagers gather. Mouthed words in silence appears humorous yet respected origin and clear some link to noble courts. Unsure of proper religious significance. The next page is filled with a neat sketch of circle of villagers under paper lanterns, mouths open in quiet song. Lanterns swaying like patient fireflies. Later, in letters back to Europe, he mentions the hush again. Half as curiosity, half as anecdote for patrons who crave oddities from the Far East. Imagine, dear sister, an entire village singing without sound some strange tribute to an emperor's forgotten words, they say. A comedy and a prayer all at once. And so, like seeds caught on the wind, these quiet notes drift far beyond Japan's shores, carried by packet ships and steamers. European drawing rooms buzz with T-time gossip. Did you hear? In Japan, they have gatherings where they sing in silence. Can you imagine such a thing? Scholars squint at the letters, scratching margins full of their own half-minus informed theories. Some think it's a Buddhist ritual gone quaint. Some think it's folklore, too strange to be true. Some think it's proof that the Japanese, polite to the marrow, would rather mouth a mistake than dare sing out of tune. Of course, none of these guesses are entirely true, and yet none are entirely wrong either. The hush is too slippery for neat labels, too ordinary for grand history books, too quietly human for loud proclamations. But it stays alive all the same, passed from tongue to pen, from pen to rumor, and rumor to the occasional curious visitor who dares to peek behind a tea-house door. You breathe slower, picturing the traveling missionary, his boots caked in road dust, squinting through a doorway as villagers gather for another silent festival under the new moon. He knows he is seeing something he can't quite explain, something too simple, too fleeting to fit inside the careful boxes of Western curiosity. So he writes it down anyway. Because some part of him knows the hush is worth saving, even if only as a footnote in his thick, leather-bound journal. And perhaps that's why the hush survives. Not because it's loud enough to demand notice, but because it keeps slipping sideways into other people's stories, into diaries, letters, half-minus remembered anecdotes passed to grandchildren who'll never visit Japan, but will grow up imagining a distant village under paper lanterns, where neighbors mouth words they all know by heart. Historians today still dig up these journals, peering at the faded ink and the puzzled sketches of silent singers under night skies. Some dismiss the hush as harmless exaggeration. Others wonder if there's a deeper truth, a whisper of the human need to share something gentle, something imperfect, even when words run out. And you, sitting here tonight, find yourself quietly grateful for that wide-eyed missionary. His curious ears pressed to a thin wall. Without him, maybe this little hush would have faded sooner. Another warm echo lost to wind and paper walls. Instead, it lingers soft and stubborn, drifting across oceans on the tip of a quill. Your breathing settles into the hush now, your mind resting in the flicker of oil lamps and the scrape of ink on rice paper. Maybe you're there too, in that inn's quiet hallway, listening alongside him, hearing what he can't. That silence isn't empty. It's full of giggles muffled behind hands, poems mouthed in the dark, neighbors leaning close to belong to something bigger than their own voice. And tonight, that hush is yours to soft, human, impossible to explain. You close your eyes and let it settle over you like a warm blanket, inked gently into history by hands that never quite understood it but cowed and bare to let it disappear. You rest deeper now, the hush around you thick as a blanket, stitched together by all the quiet villagers, the curious missionaries, the soft-minded, plucking Shane-sun players who kept a strange silence alive. And as you drift along this gentle current of history, your mind returns, almost reluctantly, to the halls of scholars, those patient souls who spend lifetimes squinting at faded scrolls and half-minded burned diaries, trying to decide whether the hush was ever truly real. You can almost see them. Professors in wool coats, glasses perched on noses, standing before rows of dusty bookshelves in some quiet corner of a university. They tap the edges of thin paper, arguing politely over tea. Was the hush just a legend? A poetic metaphor? Did common villagers really mouth along to songs inspired by an emperor's forgetfulness? One scholar insists it was just romantic folklore, invented by nostalgic storytellers in Ito's back alleys, a way to poke fun at the uptight palace while still pretending respect. Another scholar argues back that there's enough scattered evidence, letters, travel notes, festival flyers, to suggest the hush did flicker through villages and tea houses. A tiny flame of gentle mischief that no decree could fully snuff out. And yet they admit, for all the faint proof, there's something about the hush that slips away the moment they try to pin it down. It's not like a battle you can mark on a map, or a tax record you can seal with a shogun's stamp. It lives in the gaps. Between one note and the next, one mouthed word and the quiet smile that follows. You smile, half amused at the idea. Rows of stern academics debating whether a few giggling villagers under paper lanterns could really count as cultural innovation. But then again, does it matter if they can't agree? Maybe the hush's real magic is that it refuses to stand still long enough to be footnoted and boxed up. What they do agree on, what they cannot quite argue away, is how strangely the hush seems to echo through time. They find traces of it in places they don't expect. A curious line in a Meiji Ser, a songbook referencing unvoiced verses at festival night. A faded woodblock print of a countryside gathering where villagers sit in a circle, their mouths open but their voices missing from the scene. They find rumors of traveling performers who would end a comedic act with a silent song, inviting the whole audience to join in by moving their lips without a word. No written proof it happened every night, just scraps and hints, like footprints in drifting snow. Some scholars dismiss it as a playful stage gimmick. Others see it as the hush as spirit peeking out, a stubborn reminder that an accidental silence can become something more if people want it badly enough. And they argue still about the question that makes you smile the widest tonight: could this hush really be the seed that grew into karaoke? A stretch, say the serious ones. After all, modern karaoke machines came centuries later, the brainchild of clever engineers and neon-lit bars. What does a dusty village hush have to do with coin-operated microphones and deco-heavy pop songs? But some historians, the gentler ones with a twinkle in their eyes, point out that maybe it's not about the machines at all. Maybe it's about the feeling, the same soft permission to be imperfect in front of others, the same warmth of mouthing along. Whether to ancient poetry or a cheesy love ballad, the hush isn't the technology, it's the spirit, passed quietly from giggling villagers under the lanterns to city dwellers singing heartbreak songs into cheap microphones at Tua. And they argue about this every year at conferences, swapping polite papers and footnotes over hotel teapots. Some roll their eyes. Some lean in closer, voices dropping to an excited hush themselves, as if they know, deep down, the hush is listening. And you, here tonight, floating in this gentle weave of memory and argument, know exactly whose side you're on. Not the side that needs proof stamped and notarized, but the side that understands how people carry small rebellions forward in tiny ways. The side that knows how laughter slips past the walls of decree. How a soft mistake can ripple further than any perfect plan. If the hush planted a seed, you think, maybe it never wanted credit for the neon bars and off-key renditions of pop songs that came later. Maybe it just wanted to prove gently, that sometimes a shared silence is as powerful as any grand chorus, especially when it's filled with giggles, mistakes, and the soft reminder that not every voice has to be flawless to be heard. And so, the scholars keep their polite debates alive. Because that too is part of the Hush's legacy. Not an answer carved in stone, but a question that keeps inviting people to lean closer, to wonder, could this gentle, improbable thing really be true? You breathe slow, drifting deeper now, your mind resting comfortably between the polite arguments and the flicker of a single oil lamp on a desk, where a tired scholar scratches another note in the margin, the margin. Perhaps this hush is not a myth, but a gentle echo. And you smile, knowing tonight you've heard that echo yourself, soft, stubborn, impossible to silence. Your breath drifts softer now, your shoulders warm under the invisible blanket of centuries-old whispers. The hush, that gentle thread, has carried you from palace halls to riverside tea houses, from moonlit fields to the puzzled margins of scholarly debates. But tonight it brings you somewhere newer, somewhere humming with the bright, electric promise of the modern age. Picture post-war Japan, city blocks reborn in neon, the hum of electricity in the air, jukeboxes blinking in corner bars, and a generation hungry to gather again, to sing loudly this time. No more need for permission, no more hush spin to doorways. Tokyo West Side streets buzz with promised radio hits, record stores, cheap whiskey poured over cheap ice, and young people unbuttoning the tight collars of their parents' old world. In this bright, reckless tangle of post-war freedom, the hush is not gone, it's hiding inside the laughter. Because though the silence of the emperor's accidental invention no longer floats under lanterns, the longing for a place where anyone can sing without shame lies on. The hush waits, quietly patient, inside a new invention taking shape behind a bar counter in Kobe. You see him now, a practical minded musician turned tinkerer, fiddling late into the night with borrowed speakers and a real reel tape deck. And H.E.S., not dreaming of rewriting history, he just wants an easier way to keep his regulars entertained. They always beg him to play guitar for their drunken love songs. But H.E.S. tired. And besides, he knows they'd rather do it themselves if only they had a backing track. So he builds it. Not to get famous, not to launch a cultural tidal wave, but simply to solve a small, very human problem. People want to sing, but they want a gentle net under them when they do. They want the music to catch them when they miss a note. They want the freedom to forget the words, laugh it off, and try again. And so the first coin-operated karaoke machine hums to life, humble, clunky, yet perfectly tuned to that quiet need for imperfect, joyful noise. You smile now, seeing how the hush slips its gentle roots into this neon age. The technology is new, but the spirit is old. A room full of friends, half-drunk on beer and each other's company, belting out heartbreak songs with voices that crack and wander. Nobody cares if they're out of tune. Nobody cares if they forget the verse. They sing anyway, and in that moment they belong not to a rigid order or an emperor's decree, but to each other. Some say Inoue ever patented his invention, a gentle echo of the hush's own refusal to be owned outright. The hush slips through hands that try to hold it tight. It prefers to live in the warmth of togetherness, in the laughter that bubbles up when someone sings so badly it becomes beautiful, in the shy smiles of new friends, pressing microphones into each other's palms, in the quiet promise that no one will remember tomorrow how you stumbled through the chorus, only that you sang it anyway. Modern historians try to connect the dots, some in footnotes, some in glossy documentaries with dramatic voiceovers. They lay the hush beside the karaoke box and say, "See, the line is clear." Others shrug it off, saying coincidence, nothing more. But you, tonight sitting in this gentle hush, you know better. You feel how the hush has always been less about the silence and more about the soft freedom beneath it. Because whether you mouth words under paper lanterns or shout them into a dented microphone at 2 a.m., you are practicing the same quiet art. The bravery of imperfect voices, the kindness of neighbors who nod and smile instead of correcting you. A hush that began as an emperor's moment of human error now echoes in neon bars across the world, from Tokyo's alleys to the tiniest town that has ever stuck a battered karaoke machine in a back room. And maybe that's what the hush always wanted, not a perfect song, but a space for every voice shy, silly, strong, cracked, woven together in the warmed arc where nobody needs to get it right. So you breathe out now, softer than the hum of an old tape deck. You imagine 1,000 rooms where strangers sing together, each imperfect line part of the same long story. And deep down, you smile at the thought the hush was never really lost. It was just waiting for the moment when'd be loud enough to carry it forward. Still imperfect, still forgiving, still gently unstoppable. Your eyes drift closed. Neon flickers behind your eyelids, but somewhere beneath it, the old hush remains soft, stubborn, humming beneath the static. And tonight, it hums for you too. Your eve floating now, drifting warm and weightless on this hush that's carried you through palaces, rice fields, riverside tea houses, and neon bars. Your breath is slow, your mind soft, as you settle into the final turn of this winding tale. Because even now, even here in the present, the hush has disappeared. It only wears new clothes, hiding in plain sight in places you might not expect. Picture this: a small private karaoke room somewhere in Tokyo, tucked 3 floors above a ramen shop that never closes. The city hums below, trains rattling by, vending machines humming, street lights flickering. But inside this narrow box of cushioned walls and blinking song screens, the hush lives on in a brand new disguise. You're here with friends, or maybe strangers who've just become friends over a clumsy round of shared choruses. The room smells faintly of cheap beer and warm plastic microphones. The songbooks are sticky with too many fingerprints. The TV flickers through a parade of subtitles, mismatched stock footage of rivers, cherry blossoms, city streets unconnected to any song, yet weirdly perfect for everyone. And here in this cramped, echo room, the hush breathes. It hides behind your friend's nervous giggle when you hand them the mic. It waits in the moment someone mumbles, "No, I can't sing," but then does it anyway when everyone begs just one song. It swells when the chorus hits and your voice cracks, and nobody cares because everyone's voice cracks too. And when the machine gets the words wrong, or you forget the line, the hush is there too, saying it's fine. Keep going. We're here for you. You see now that this hush never really belonged to the palace, or the village, or the missionary's journal, or even the clever inventor in Kobe. It belongs to anyone who's ever needed the courage to open their mouth and be imperfect, and the kindness of others to let that imperfection bloom. Somewhere outside this karaoke box, history books still debate: is karaoke the hush's child or just a happy accident? But inside this room, you know the answer doesn't matter. The hush lies whenever voices rise together, forgiving each other's missed notes, laughing at forgotten verses, wrapping mistakes in warmth and neon glow. And maybe, if you listen carefully, you can hear a trace of that first hush, an emperor standing frozen on a golden dais, forgetting his lines while the palace musicians strummed an awkward rescue. You can hear the riverside tea house giggles, the silent harvest songs mouthed under the paper lantern moon, the missionary's puzzled notes about villagers singing without singing. You realize the hush isn't just silence. It's the space people make for each other when they gather around a fragile thing, like a song or a secret, and promise not to break it by judging too harshly. So you breathe in this hush one last time, warm and full. In your mind, the TV flickers to your favorite song. The beat starts up again. Someone next to you nudges your arm. Your turn. You laugh, shake your head, pretend you'll sit this one out. Then you pick up the mic anyway, heart thumping, voice small at first but growing bigger as the hush catches you and lifts you up. Outside, the city keeps humming trains and vending machines, neon on midnight rhyming. Inside, your small, imperfect song threads itself into the hush that's traveled centuries to meet you here. Nobody cares if you miss a note. Nobody remembers if you forget a line. Everyone remembers how you sang it anyway. And that, you understand now, is all the hush ever wanted. So here you are, quiet now, warm now, floating at the soft edge of a story that started centuries ago with an emperor's pause in a room too polite to break the silence. It drifted through moonlit fields, riverside tea houses, for-un diaries, neon rooms, and the gentle courage of voices that knew they didn't have to be perfect to be true. You breathe slow, feel the hush settle in your chest like a small lantern flickering behind your ribs. If you listen closely, you can still hear the faint notes strings plucked somewhere far away, the soft laughter of villagers mouthing songs under lanterns, the soft hum of a karaoke box waiting for another imperfect chorus to carry into the night. Let that hush stay with you a moment longer. Let it remind you that mistakes can be gentle gifts, that the quiet you make for someone else's trembling voice is as precious as the voice itself. Let it remind you that you belong, that you belong, that you belong. To this story, to every small room where people gather, smile, and forgive each other's missed notes with warm, patient laughter. Now, wherever you are, city window or countryside room, night train or quiet bed, let your shoulders soften. Let the hush wrap around you like the paper walls of an old tea house, the warm hum of a neon room, the soft circle under harvest lanterns. Breathe out. Let it go. You've sung enough for tonight. Sleep easy now, traveler. The hush is still here, carrying you gently where songs are safe, where no one minds if you forget the words, where the room stays warm long after the music stops.